Okay, we'll move on to item number 12. This will be Buellton Urban Growth Boundary Initiative City Council Workshop, and this will be head by City Manager Scott Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. If you give me just a moment here, I'll make sure that this gets up so everyone can see it. Hopefully we are there. Is that broadcasting properly, Russ? Wonderful. Okay. Move this off to the side here. All right. Mayor and council members, as you're aware, we started this process back in February where I brought forward to the city council an initial starting point for discussion, a concept for updating the city's urban growth boundary, which has been in place since 2008. The urban growth boundary as it currently exists and will exist until December 31st, 2025, is coterminous with the city's city limits. So there are no areas outside of the city limits where the city is permitted under the urban growth boundary to provide municipal services. This essentially locks the city's boundaries in place. As I mentioned, it's set to expire in 2025. The city has two options. You can allow the current initiative to expire, or you can put another initiative on the ballot that would take the effect of extending that urban growth boundary. Staff has brought to the council initially and subsequently through workshops with the Planning Commission, or a workshop with the Planning Commission, a concept that the hope of staff is to be able to identify specifically which areas around the city would be suitable for growth by the city in the future. We're not talking about annexation immediately or even with a specific time frame, simply the ability and the flexibility to move forward with development in the event that the city finds it desirable. Why we're doing this? Again, we're looking for flexibility. We're looking to extend the protection that the urban growth boundary provides to us, and to essentially assist in the guiding of future development that the city may find either necessary or desirable. Move past that. This is the initial concept that I brought forward. You'll see that there are proposals for urban growth boundary expansions to the west, to the north, and to the east. And to the south, you'll note the strange looking blue area down there, which is kind of a special animal all to itself. I'll start with that since it is a little bit different. As I mentioned previously, and we'll continue to discuss this evening, the urban growth boundary would not be proposed to be extended to the south, but I would propose that the initiative, if it's brought forward by the city council, include a provision that would automatically extend the urban growth boundary into this area to the south in the event that the county were to approve any project with urban uses in this area. And we do this not because the city thinks it's acceptable or desirable to put development down to the south, but because we don't have any voice in what goes on down here. If the county should decide that there is a reason why they would like to approve something down there, the brunt of the impacts coming from that type of a development would fall on our residents and our infrastructure. Any revenue that's generated by development in that area, unless it's annexed to the city, would go to the county and would not benefit our residents or our infrastructure. So this is simply protection in the long term, so that in the event the county might find it desirable to approve something down there for whatever reason, the city would then have the ability under the urban growth boundary to approach LAFCO and request annexation of this property, or these properties, given their potential impact on city resources and infrastructure. I'm happy to answer any questions on that here when I conclude my presentation, but right now I'd move on to the Planning Commission workshop, which was held on March 18th. There were a number of comments received from the public and a number of comments coming out of the Planning Commission that evening. I will not go through all of them. I have condensed a number of them into these kind of filtered them down into these condensed comments. Generally, comments from the public indicated that the city might consider rather than simply considering whether the options are to build up or out, maybe building small is the answer. And one of our residents suggested possibly even a 600 square foot minimum lot size to allow for more housing units to be placed in the available land that the city has left. Water limitations should be considered when expanding city boundaries, and water limitations are always considered regardless of the type of development that's being proposed. Commercial space could be converted to accommodate the state housing mandates. While this is a possibility, we can discuss this further if the council likes, but staff has concerns that removing any of our existing commercial land available for commercial development is a hindrance to the future of city operations in the long run. Let's see. I'm just trying to hit some highlights here. The area to the east, the Polo Ranch project, as it's been noted here by this commenter, should be considered based on its benefits to and the desires of city residents rather than simple cost benefit analysis. The area to the north that's shown on the concept plan, the Planning Commission felt that a specific plan should be required for the property to the north as well in order prior to consideration of the annexation in order to properly plan for future use and infrastructure expansion in that area. Generally speaking, the public felt that the city should oppose any development to the south of the city, and that the city should ask LAFCO whether considering action to include the area to the south would be more likely to have the area added to the sphere of influence. I did have some interaction with LAFCO executive director following this meeting, and that is not the case. He doesn't believe that would necessarily lead to LAFCO considering such an action. Areas to the west should not be annexed if active agricultural uses are interspersed. I'm sorry, that should have been a planning commission comment. And the public comment was generally that the areas to the west represent more than what the city may need. So without going into any more of these, I'm happy to answer any questions that the council may have regarding the commission's comments that came out of their workshop. If you'd like, I can answer those now, or we can move on to the rest of the presentation.
No, go ahead, Scott.
Okay. All right. After the Planning Commission workshop, the comments were taken into consideration, as well as some additional information regarding the properties to the north. When we originally placed the properties to the north on this map as part of the concept, the understanding from the agent of the property owner was that these properties were all under Williamson Act contract, which meant that there was a 10-year minimum of a 10-year wait before anything could be developed on these pieces of property. Because that was the case, we needed an area that we could look at to address the housing element requirements that are coming in about 7 years. We needed to be able to address those before those 10-year limitations expired, which is why we were looking to the west. We've since found that only the small northernmost parcel of that group of parcels shown is covered by Williamson Act. So the rest of the properties there, the bulk of that property is not. Therefore, it doesn't have a 10-year hold on it. Since that would be available to accommodate any demands that the state may have as part of the next housing element cycle, I would suggest removing properties to the west of the city from the housing or from the urban growth boundary expansion concept. Primary reason for that is A, we don't need it to meet the state housing demand, and B, given what we've seen, particularly through some of the recent discussions that the city council's had and some development projects within the city, we have congestion and traffic concerns at the 101 on Highway 246 and on either side, the Avenue of Flags and McMurray Road. Those traffic concerns could be made considerably worse if we started adding higher density development to the west of the city. So rather than focusing in that direction, I would suggest, as part of the concept that I'm proposing this evening, that the council look to the north, and that's so the west area is gone. The east and the north are essentially as they they were in the prior concept. The differences are, or the only real difference between now and then is now we know Williamson Act does not apply to most of the property to the north, so. Land use concept is essentially unchanged. Some of this, and we'll go through this here real briefly, some of this has changed. This is the initial land use concept. The urban growth boundary restrictions that we're looking at as part of the new concept. The northernmost property is identified as Reserve Residential 2, which would have a 10-acre minimum lot size on our general plan. These density numbers are really irrelevant for anything other than showing it on a plan. They were selected in order to kind of match what the county's zoning is on it currently, until such time as, if and when the property owners decide it's time to annex to the city, then the council would have to look at what ultimate zoning would be for those properties. But we have 3 of them here. The importance is not necessarily the category that they're in, but the proposed requirements to be met prior to annexation. So if we look at Reserve Residential 1, which is the small 2-acre piece right off of McMurray Road here, right behind Hampton Inn. It's a very small piece of property. And that would simply be the normal annexation process. If we expanded into that area, the only thing that would be required for that would be pre-zoning and development permit application, which is generally what takes place before an annexation is considered. Some cities dispense with a development permit application and only look at pre-zoning, but I would recommend that we know what is being proposed there before the council make a decision to consider annexation of it. Reserve Residential 2 is a 10-acre piece to the north. I'm sorry, this slide wasn't updated. As I mentioned, I'm sorry. Yeah.
1 second.
Yes.
Is that weird little piece of property that was next to the commons?
Yes, it's right behind the Hampton Inn, right there.
Excuse me. Okay.
Okay. So the property to the north, as I mentioned, is not under Williamson Act contract for about 95% of that property. Instead, the Planning Commission is requiring that prior to consideration of any annexation, the city council require that a specific plan be proposed and hearings be held. And if the council finds it acceptable to adopt the specific plan, then annexation can take place. And likewise, Reserve Residential 4, which is the 47-acre piece right here where on the existing Polo Ranch, staff is recommending that if the council moves forward with this, that a requirement be in place to require the adoption of a specific plan prior to an annexation moving forward.
So just to confirm, at this point, Reserve Residential 2 and Reserve Residential 4 are the same terms that are being suggested.
Well, yeah, the same restrictions or the same requirements are being proposed. Yeah, the difference between the two numbers has to do with county zoning. That's all.
Okay,
so
thank you.
So are we
Yes.
doing questions now or
No.
Not quite. I'm getting there. We'll go through this again. To the west, removed from the concept. We're losing that. These are just blow up slides here. I kind of got ahead of myself. To the east, that's the 2-acre property right behind Hampton Inn. And the other parcel to the east here, that's the Polo Ranch property specific plan to include full environmental review and documentation prior to annexation. And then to the north, Williamson Act is out, but Planning Commission recommends approval of a specific plan. So that's where we're at. And then again, to the south, we have no land use designation proposed for that because it would not be within our urban growth boundary and therefore not subject to annexation initiated by the city or by a property owner, because we would not be able to provide municipal services to it. So. This is a multi-step process. We've completed the first 2 steps, which were the introduction in February and the Planning Commission workshop in March. We are now at phase 3. This meeting tonight is the City Council workshop. And over the next month or so, we will continue to accept public input on this. We will take whatever comments the City Council gives to us this evening, and we will work on following that direction. So if the council's direction is to draft an initiative to put on the ballot, we will do that. The council will need to give us direction as to what that initiative should consider. We'll bring that back. We will continue to take public comment. We'll bring it back to the city council at the next meeting, which is scheduled for May 23rd. At which time we will present additional public comment that has come in, and the city council can make changes to the initiative as appropriate and or place it on the ballot or vote to place it on the ballot. We have received a number of written comments to this in this regard on the urban growth boundary. I have posted all of them in a single file entitled written public comments. It is on our Buellton Engage page. And I'll put that. These are the web addresses. There's a big long one there. Ignore that one. Just use the small one at the bottom. tinyurl.com/Buellton UGB will take you there. Or there's that nifty QR code that you can use there too.
I'm
Yeah.
proud of you. You did a
Hey.
QR code.
Hey, I did a QR code.
That is
I know
that is
how these things
impressive work.
so- Yeah.
You can
almost
also, you
Instagram.
can also just Google Buellton Engage and you get it right there.
Yeah, you can. Okay. So moving backward just a little bit here, now is the time for the workshop. I'm happy to answer any questions that the city council may have. This is the format that the planning commission used. I would suggest the same format, although it is your meeting. You may do with it what you like. But it would be helpful for me in terms of being able to organize this when we compile all the notes and the comments, to take them in order of the areas to be discussed. So you can take them in whichever order you prefer. But preferably we can discuss and take comments and give comments on these 4 areas of the city. And then that'll make it easier for me to compile them in the future. So at this time, I'm happy to close my mouth and let the council take this back over and answer questions as they come up or take notes.
Okay, thank you, Scott, for that. We'll bring it back to council for any questions for staff.
Well, you know, I got a question.
And I'll go to John.
That is the mic, right?
On the urban growth boundary, we're establishing a new revised urban growth boundary with this.
What I'm putting forward is a concept for a new revised urban growth boundary. That is not a proposal from the city. It is my concept based on what I feel the needs of the future needs of the city might be. The city council can go in any direction they wish.
So the other urban growth boundary expires. What is the expiration date for this next revised? Or can it be changed any next?
I would suggest, and I haven't worked out the dates yet, but what I would suggest we do is that we look at a date that is beyond our current housing element cycle, but that the expiration take place at least 2 years prior to the next housing element cycle. And the reason for that is if it goes too close to the next housing element cycle or beyond it, the city is unable to prepare for whatever the next phase of this might be. And what I believe this concept will do was give us enough room to accommodate whatever comes down the pipeline from the state and guide the development in the direction we think it should go while still meeting the housing element requirements. If we go too far, if we go past the next housing element cycle, we're kind of shooting in the dark. We don't know what's going to be available, and we're liable to find ourselves with a problem. So I'm guessing somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 years or 12 to 14 years from the expiration of the existing one, which will happen at the end of next year. But prior to the
37.
prior to the next meeting, I'll come back with a specific date for you.
And in consideration of the west boundary, if the county came in and put something there, or approved something, and a housing development of some kind or something, would we have to take care of that? Would we have to let them into the city?
We run the same risk there that we do to the south. The only reason that the south was at the forefront of my mind is because we have had in the last several years a proposal come to the city and now is working its way through the county, apparently trying to get a development approved down there. Now, the county's general plan does not allow for that, but if it did, then the area to the south, if we put it in the initiative, we'd be able to expand out. We could put the same thing to the west if the city council wanted to do that.
Yes, I was thinking if we put a blue on the west side as well, then we would give us the same right to tell them if you can't do that unless we own it, unless.
Well, it doesn't give us the right to tell them they can't. What it does is if the county were to approve something over our objection, then our urban growth boundary would expand out to encompass that area, allowing then the city to come in and say, look, if we're going to be faced with a development one way or another, at the very least, we should get the benefits that come from that development in terms of tax revenues. Anything to the west is likely to be residential, which generally is a net negative when it comes to the revenues, but you get one-time impact fees as these things develop, sewer connection fees, those sorts of things. There would need to be considerable discussion with any development around us. It's not likely to happen in a vacuum because they're going to have to either provide their own wastewater treatment or connect to the city. So if it's going to be something big enough, it would by necessity need to come to the city unless they created their own wastewater plant. So lots of ifs. The primary reason for the area to the south is there was kind of a project in the making already. And if we're looking to disincentivize the approval of something by the county in that area, taking away some of the potential benefit to the county for approving it. And I'm not suggesting the county is out trying to approve this. I'm just saying we don't know what may happen in the future, and it's better to protect the city than it is to leave it to chance. So.
And do we know if any of these properties to the west of us are in that the agricultural preserve?
All the properties to the west of the city are zoned agricultural. That doesn't mean they're necessarily in a preserve. There is a what do they call it? An area plan. Is it the Santa Rita Hills area plan or something, which begins about half mile, I believe, to the west of the city. And if Nancy Emerson would hear, she could tell us exactly where, but I don't know exactly. But that is on top of the county's general plan. It is another layer of regulation and protection. So I'm not terribly worried about anything happening further out away from the city with regard to large scale development. It's that first half mile area that there's what they call an existing rural developed neighborhood just to the west of Brick Barn Vineyard there. It's conceivable that at some points we may see some additional housing there.
So initially we were worried about our sphere of influence, and our sphere of influence ends at the city line right now. And after this new improved revised urban growth boundary, will we have the same sphere of influence, the same limitation for our influence and our?
We will, but because the urban growth boundary can't change the sphere of influence. But what we can do, and I've had discussions with LAFCO and with the county on this already, is that we can enter into an agreement with the county, and LAFCO will memorialize it through something they are preliminarily calling, I believe it's an area of review or an area of referral. We would essentially draw a boundary around the city, a certain distance out from the city limit line, and any county projects that are proposed within that area, the city would be notified of and asked for comment on, and that would give us the ability to review those projects and give comments both to staff as well as to testify before the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Whereas most of the time, projects like that, they wouldn't even pop up on our radar. This would ensure that we have the ability to comment on them prior to them going to hearing.
So I thought that one of our problems was not having a say if the county wanted to let them put pot right next to our city line, and which is what's occurred just further, but hadn't given us the odor. I just don't know how much they can keep fudging it. I don't know if the party's going to die or what.
Well,
but if they decide to put a pot right outside of city limits, would we have any?
Well, not legally. We don't have a way to stop it, even with the sphere of influence out there. What we were looking for was that I refer to it as a seat at the table so that we can discuss it with them. This area of referral would give us the seat at the table and I'm less worried about cannabis right now because at least under the county's current scheme, they have issued all of the cannabis grow permits they're going to issue. They've already been issued. I don't believe that there's any more going to pop up to the west of us here very close that haven't already. I could be wrong. There could be somebody sitting on one, but I don't believe so. But nevertheless, there are other issues that could pop up in the future that could be as impactful to the city, if not more so than the cannabis issue. And so this area of referral, anything that the county would consider from a development perspective or from a change in zoning or that sort of thing, if we come up with this agreement with the county, they will refer that to us. But that's not really a big discussion for tonight because it really doesn't have anything to do with the urban growth boundary. It's kind of a parallel issue, and we are working that with the county and LAFCO.
And it's my understanding that the county limited the number of permits that they gave for cannabis grows, like they do a liquor license.
They
So-
capped it, and it has been.
So I think
they've
you're
issued
correct
those
in your
permits.
assessment that they're probably tapped out. Anything else, John?
No, that was it. I just was, want to protect our interests to the west as well, and that, I thought that was why we were including that in the first proposal.
Just so I know how we want to run, like, you want this, are we doing just overall questions and then we'll go into zone questions, or do you want to?
Yeah, well, yeah, we can do that.
My one was, so I like, with us having the current urban growth boundary that we have, that's coterminous with the city limits, which is coterminous with the sphere of influence. I'm assuming that has derived a high level of infill that's taken place throughout that time, correct?
Well, yes, any development has taken place within the existing city limits. And but by necessity, we can't spread out, and we can't, whether the city wants it or not, we can't serve anything outside of our urban growth boundary. So yes.
Is there an estimate by city staff of how much infill space is left?
We may have something in our general plan that's not, Andrea may know that.
I can do some digging and see if I
Okay.
can. I don't have it on.
I don't have a firm count on that right now. We have 200, we know of well over 300 units in the pipeline for development, either under construction or soon to be under construction right now. It is conceivable that over, if what we see is continued investment in Buellton, we could easily see what few vacant parcels we have left within the city proposed for development well before the expiration of the current housing element cycle. And so the issue isn't whether or not we have enough to meet the state demands the next time based on what's vacant now, because based on what we're seeing, what's vacant now will likely not be vacant. Most of it will not be vacant in 8 years. The issue we need to contend with is what is likely to be vacant still 8 years from now. And
most of the projects that we're seeing that are currently being utilized within the city limits are high density housing.
most of them will be high density housing. Most of them, the significantly sized residentially zoned properties are under what's referred to as an AHA zone, an affordable housing overlay zone. Even some of our commercial property has been identified as that, and those pieces almost by necessity will wind up being high density residential, because given the system for developing affordable housing, it only really works if you're dealing with high density, very low income housing. It doesn't work with moderate income housing. There's just not, the financing infrastructure isn't there to support that type of development.
And then final one, which is more just for the education, everyone for this is that by not staying on top of our arena numbers, SB 35 becomes enacted, builder's remedy becomes a whole thing. And that's currently what the project is, which is Polo Village was due to that being an issue.
SB 35, right. Once the 3 projects along McMurray have finished building, essentially we will have met our arena requirements, and SB 35 will no longer be in play, should no longer be in play for the city. SB 330 will continue. But again, we don't have a whole lot more spaces before we run out. And, whatever our general plan does identify, a significant number of those are going to be potential sites based on ADUs. And so there's no way to tell what how many people are going to come in with an ADU. It's always still a potential, but we're not talking about large development there. We're talking about, a relatively small number over 8 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wolfcott, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to clarify something you just said. So you said if those Polo Village apartments are built, SB 35 would not be in play.
If the city meets its RENA numbers, and that would happen with Polo Village, Village Senior Apartments and Buellton Garden Apartments should give us enough to meet our RENA numbers for this cycle.
Well, this is what I want to be clear
Yeah.
on. So my understanding of SB 35 was that our housing element had to be approved by HCD. And once it's approved, SB 35 was no longer in play.
No, we have to meet our RENA. It has to be approved and certified, which ours has been. But I believe
I was gonna say the builder's remedy
Yeah.
is not in play once
Right.
the housing element is approved.
SB 35 is different.
So SB 35, which does allow them to bypass some of our zoning, still in play and is in play in most cities in Southern California. What you don't want to get to is the builder's remedy, which allows them to bypass essentially everything
Right.
and put a 12-story tower if they want.
Right. So, okay, so the builder's remedy only comes in play if our housing element hasn't been approved, which has been approved.
It has.
But you're saying SB 35 is still in play as long as our arena numbers haven't been met yet.
Correct.
And so what risk do we run with SB 35? What is that particularly doing?
That requires essentially a ministerial approval, no public hearing, just like a builder's remedy project would be. But we have more ability to regulate under our zoning as far as we have objective development standards that we apply to it.
Got it.
Builder's remedy, I think even
You can do
even
whatever
that
you
gets
want.
really
Right.
density and that sort of thing gets really.
Okay.
Just to clarify
Yeah.
that if we have arena numbers, 35 is no longer.
Yes, that's
Correct.
Mhm.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to make sure we were clear on that.
And in looking at, and I'm just, because we're on the topic, and looking at the urban growth boundary, not for the current cycle, but for the following one, if you are filling up most of the vacant infill land in this cycle, then when the new numbers come down at the end of this cycle, you have to have someplace to put those numbers, whether it's upzoning single family or pushing out to the sides. So an urban growth boundary that gives you some space to push out allows for less dense building. An urban growth boundary that's constricting pushes you up because that's the only place you have left to go.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. That is actually right where I was going with my questioning. Am I cutting in line here? Or you want to go next?
No, you're done.
Yeah, I got more. So I wanted to ask about how HCD and the housing element plan deals with site specific plans, right? So it might be good and well to say, okay, well, we've zoned these, whatever, but come next housing cycle in our arena, I want to know how HCD, to my understanding, backing up 1,000 feet, right? They say, counties, you have this arena, here's your allocation, and then as SB CAG gets together and they say, okay, everybody, here's your allotment, here's your number allotment. So I just want to make sure we're not providing incentive for anybody to come in, HCD, to come in and say, well, it's very good and well that you have these 10-acre parcels zoned here, but you're going to need to put 300 units there. And so I just don't want to provide that incentive if we don't have to. I don't want to give us the
Right.
flexibility, but I don't want to, open the doors.
Well, so here's how that plays out. This last time, and it is exactly in Santa Barbara County, we don't have a larger metropolitan planning organization like SCAG or SANDAG down in San Diego, where you have multiple counties that do this. Santa Barbara County is an entity unto itself, which is where SB CAG comes in. So the state hands an allocation for the county as a whole to the county. County turned it over to SB CAG. SB CAG got all the member agencies together, the different cities and the county, to sit down and all the planners, of which Mrs. Kiefer is one of them, sat down and came up with a methodology for distributing those units amongst the different jurisdictions. Now, in the past, they have tended to look at which jurisdictions have room for development to be built.
Mhm.
This time they took a different approach, and I was sitting in an economic development meeting yesterday with the guys from the county and SB CAG who agreed it was a better approach. This cycle, they used the approach that said, we're going to put the additional units where they're needed, not where there's room to build them. So in the past, we've had room to build it. We got larger numbers. Buellton's the only city I'm aware of that came up with a lower housing element RENA number this cycle than they did in the previous cycle. Most cities had double or more than that from what the previous cycle was. Ours went down. And it was because they placed the units where they were needed, which is on the South Coast and up in Santa Maria and over in Lompoc, as opposed to putting them in the valley. while it would be nice to think that they would continue with that methodology in the next cycle, there's no guarantee of that. And so I think it's prudent to allow some room for expansion. Now, if I thought they were going to give us a arena number of 3,000, I would say we need to go with more property than we have here. Otherwise, we're going to wind up with these massive high-rise housing projects up here. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I think it's not unreasonable that they might come to us and say, your arena number is going up to 600 or 700 8 years from now. I think that's not out of the question. And so it would be nice to plan to ensure that if they came to us with a number that large, we had room to place them in a manner that ensured that not all of them wound up being high density, affordable level apartments, very low income apartments, that we had some room to build some additional single family housing. One of the big problems that's discussed through the whole housing process in recent years has been something called the missing middle.
Right.
Got plenty of housing for the people who can afford it, and you got plenty of housing for the low and the very low income, but that moderate income bracket, which tends to look for smaller single family homes if they can afford it, they can't, because
Right.
they're being priced out of it in the typical market, and there's no infrastructure set up to allow for the financing of deed restricted moderate income housing. So it's a tricky balancing act, but that's what I'm looking for, is give the city the flexibility to accommodate that number if it comes, without opening the floodgates to, unlimited potential.
So I guess another way of asking the question I was asking was, is HED, is the, whatever the organization is, SBCAG, going to look at our boundaries and say, you guys have room, we're going to give you more?
We don't know.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. There's no way to know. But what I do know is if we don't try and accommodate or make room to accommodate whatever number they do give us now, when that number does come down the pipeline, it'll be too late to try and fix it. Because the only way to fix it then, by expanding the boundaries, is going to be by going to the ballot. And we don't have that amount of time from the time we start that discussion until it's set. And if that's the case, the only thing we have to do is we have to start upzoning
I understand.
property within the
We
city.
can't like institute a trigger like we do in the South. We can say if arena allocation is above X threshold. I'm just, brainstorming.
That's one of those things that, conceivably it might be possible. What I worry about, given HCDs, which is why I had this weird system set up on the West that was kind of contrary to what everybody thought.
Right.
We included in the urban growth boundary, but we require unless it's a state mandated thing, we require a voter initiative.
Mhm.
I did that because if the state looks at it and says, oh, it's outside your urban growth boundary, they're not going to, you have to really convince them that it's a real potential for housing.
Uh-huh.
When they want to see what you've planned for, they want to be able to say, yeah, this is legit. You're not just handing us a line saying, oh yeah, this is available. Cities used to look at church properties and say, oh, this church has a large yard out front. We're going to plan for 50 units in the front yard of the church. And they bought it for a couple cycles and then they stopped, and they're getting more and more critical. There was a lawsuit in South LA that came out of a shopping center or something. It was
Orange County, and they said that theoretically somebody could build multi-level multifamily housing above the existing parking garage.
Right.
And so they said all of that space should count.
Right.
And
Yeah.
HED said no.
No.
Right.
And to the church point, there's now a state law that gives by right building of certain types of units on a church property if the church wants to build those units there. And part of that reason for that was what Scott just said. So you don't want to try and be overly tricky with it. You want to do the kind of the best planning that you can, because they put up, as Scott said, they put up with a lot of maneuvering for a long time. And now those are the cities like Alacanada, Flint Ridge, like down in Orange County, where they're just getting the Attorney General's offices on them. So I'd rather the Attorney General's office not be on us.
And as a short, but hopefully tying up the answer to your question, when it comes down to it, the allocations come to the cities. they don't really care whether you think you have room for it or not. If they think you have room for it based upon your geography, they're going to give it to you. The HCD is going to look at an urban growth boundary and say, we don't care. You know, if you've got a number that's 10,000 and your urban growth boundary says you can't grow, you either find a place within your city limits where you can build it, or you're gonna, we're gonna have a problem.
Go into
So-
receivership.
So they're not going to give us more because we're anticipating an expansion is what I'm getting at, any more than they would give us more if we didn't.
Well,
right?
the other side of the coin is
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
the county could very well, and I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would love to be wrong, but the county could look at their housing element and be like, well, Buellton's got some great spot right outside the city lines here. Let's zone that for housing.
They very well could.
Right.
Absolutely.
Um,
And we would take the impact of that.
of
Yes, we
course,
would.
yeah.
That's happening in Lompoc right now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, the only other question I want, and I know we want to move on, but is the specific plan idea.
Mhm.
How does that affect HCD and our plans for the future? I mean, is that?
It doesn't.
that doesn't mean anything.
It's essentially would become a local requirement that the city is imposing on itself that says, yes, it's within this property may be within the urban growth boundary. But until we fully evaluate a development proposal to include not simply site plan and parking and that sort of thing, but we want a full evaluation of all the infrastructure impacts. We want a full evaluation of the full environmental impact evaluation. Until all that is set and the city council said, yes, this is a good project that we want to see developed, the city will not support a request for annexation.
Further question?
Got to say, Your Honor.
I don't see one.
Ouch. I have an initial question for our counselor. If we let the current UGB expire, what position does that put us in? Can we form a sphere of influence going forward?
Sure, yeah. If the current UGB expires with nothing to take its place, then you would be just like the majority of other cities in the state that have unincorporated areas around them. You could go to the county LAFCO, say we'd like to establish a sphere of influence that expands beyond our current jurisdictional boundaries. And then within that sphere, there are certain rights to weigh in on projects similar to what the city manager described earlier.
Seat at the table.
Yeah. And essentially what will happen is that anytime the county has a project within your sphere of influence, you'll get notice and you'll have not the right to demand that they come into the city, but the expectation is that the project will either be processed through the county and then annexed into the city, or the county will sort of begin the processing of it, but before they approve it, they'll want the city to essentially take it over with the annexation because you'll be providing the services to it. So it's time to move. And that's, whether it's down Hemet in Riverside County or Santa Clarita in LA County, I'm familiar with those kinds of things happening. So it would not be unusual, but frankly, spheres of influence and the city manager sort of referenced this. Annexation within a sphere of influence is really driven by a property owner. Property owner wants to do a project. They begin processing with the county. The county recognizes that it's going to be the city that's going to be acting on it. So you start working kind of together, and then ultimately the city takes over. That's a fairly normal process. An urban growth boundary essentially constrained, but by virtue of not providing services, it constrains where your sphere would be. Ultimately, I would imagine if the urban growth boundary were extended by the voters, then you would wind up with the sphere moving out to the limits of the urban growth boundary because it only makes sense. If you don't extend the urban growth boundary, well, then you're going to have a sphere that goes somewhere, but that's going to be a long land use decision and a process that the five of you, city manager, will work together on what to take to LAFCO.
But just to be clear, this probably could be for either one of you. If you let this expire in the sphere of influence, then we create a sphere of influence through LAFCO. You could ultimately have a lot of projects that now go beyond your urban growth boundary. So now it's kind of, in the way that this was crafted is that it's pretty difficult to just have the county come out and say, oh, we're gonna put a hotel right here and you gotta hook us up.
And you have to hook us up. That's the
So
part
under
that
under the
can't
spirit
happen.
of influence, it's like what we have described, only a seat at the table. They can still say, we don't care. You're gonna have to hook us up anyways.
Mhm.
So one other question I have for Scott, just to clarify, that property to the west, is that Williamson? Did you say that was Williamson under the Williamson Act?
No, the property of the west is not under the Williamson Act.
Williamson Act.
It's not.
Okay, so we could go either way with this by actually taking in some of that agricultural land in the UBG
We could.
and go to the north and to the
That's correct.
to the east.
That's,
Okay.
that's possible. Mhm.
What was specifically the mindset of saying, let's take that west end out? Because there's no desire for development, or LAFCO would be a difficult hurdle to jump, or?
No, it was based on two things. The first of which is, right now, our traffic numbers on Highway 246 are way too high. We all recognize we need to slow things down and improve the situation there. Adding more development to the west of the city is only going to exacerbate that situation. The second one, and the more practical aspect of this, is that area was added for consideration. I added it for consideration initially because I felt we may need that to meet the state housing demand, because the areas to the north were assumed to be under Williamson Act contract. When we found out that they were not under Williamson Act contract, now those areas to the north can be used to identify housing locations in our next housing element cycle. So we don't need to go to the west anymore, since we don't really want to see a lot of development out there, and we don't need to go there to meet the
Right.
housing mandates from the state. I just pulled it off. There's just no reason to look at it from my
And-
perspective. Yeah.
And just to clarify this, that would make it more difficult for county to do anything.
Well, I don't know that it would keep the county from doing it. The county's got, particularly the area just to the west of the city, county has a couple of different layers of protections on that. Between its general plan, its zoning ordinance, and this area plan that I think it's the Santa Rita Hills area plan. A number of different levels of regulation and policy that would protect that. The fact that if we left the urban growth boundary where it is to the west, it might make it more difficult for the
That's-
county to come in and demand that we connect, because we have a voter initiated restriction that would preclude that. I'm not sure, and maybe you've got a better idea, whether we would prevail if we were challenged on that.
Yeah.
But I know that LAFCO doesn't view the urban growth boundary as a hindrance to their ability to force a city to annex property. And that has been decided in the courts, from my understanding. That if LAFCO decides, no, this piece of property belongs in the city, they will add it to the city over the city's objection,
Right.
urban
And
growth
that's-
boundary
that's-
notwithstanding.
And that was my consideration, and just for the edification of the people up here that don't know about this, is that Lompoc tried to annex some property. It was farmland. LAFCO told them no. And then somebody came in with the builder's remedy. So Lompoc is
Mhm.
going to lose the fees on that,
Yep.
and they're still gonna have to put it in anyways. They have to hook up and they get the impact of
Yeah.
it. So
Mhm.
it's all this land use stuff is kind of a for lack of a better word, a mess.
Mhm.
Good word. Okay, I.
Did that happen to us? That's what I'm trying to.
It could.
It could always happen to us. There's not a lot we can do to prevent it. LAFCO is its own agency. It's, as you know, the board of LAFCO it comprises a couple members of the Board of Supervisors and then members from various cities. And I believe there's an at-large member. I'd have to go back and look at the actual makeup of it. But what it does is it determines where it feels are appropriate boundaries for different types of jurisdictions. Cities being one of many that they look at. But cities are the one that obviously are most relevant to us. And when we talk about providing municipal services, if a property is approved for development and LAFCO looks at it and says, no, this development really needs to happen within the boundaries of a city because it exceeds the ability of the property owner to adequately serve it, or the county to adequately serve it, then they will say, no, we're going to annex this into the city. I'm not saying they will. they can. And I've been told that in no uncertain terms by the executive director of LAFCO. So they don't necessarily recognize our initiative as precluding annexation to the city. They recognize it as an expression of desire by our citizenry not to extend municipal services out beyond that.
Right, well, and the unfortunate thing is the state is sticking their nose in everybody's business and they came up with builder's remedy, and correct me if I'm wrong, Counselor. If somebody comes with a project, says I'm willing to put in 30% low income, they can just supersede what the county or the city wants, correct?
If our housing element is not approved, that is correct.
Okay.
And obviously our housing element for the current cycle is approved, so
Yeah.
we're fine.
So we're lucky there.
So our concern here is the housing element, what is it? It's got 6, 8 years from now,
7 years from now.
7 years from now.
2031.
Want to make sure we're well planned for that so that we don't wind up with one of those Santa Monica projects that you like so much, sir.
Absolutely.
I just
Okay.
want to say thanks to staff. I know we were the first municipality in the county to be approved, so I know y'all did a lot of work on that. So thank you.
Correct. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna officially open this up to public comment. I do have one speaker, and this is Teresa Riley.
So I'm Teresa Riley, and I am a local resident. I live in the Ranch Club Estates, but I'm here tonight as a board member of We Watch and specifically addressing the south parcel that is proposed. So I will just address my comments to that. So first of all, We Watch is a San Ynez Valley land use and environmental organization. And we're very concerned that the south of Buellton Ag 2 100 land under and around the 2 bridges over the San Ynez River not be developed for any uses other than open space or recreation. Here is why we recommend that the county and the city of Buellton work together to protect this land from urban development in perpetuity. Most of it is currently floodplain. We're already seeing heavy rains that dramatically change the river flow. Climate change experts predict more of this scenario in the future. It may well be necessary to enlarge the current 100-year floodplain zone. It shows on maps as extending to slightly south of Santa Rosa Road. The second point is the south gateway to the valley is our most pristine entrance and exit, providing a scene with agricultural and open space as you exit from the canyon into the river valley. Driving south from Buellton is a reverse, beautiful gateway into the canyon and the mountains. This rural area needs to be protected. The third point is that a landowner has rights to use land zoned for agriculture for that purpose. But there's nothing that requires the county or the city to rezone that land so that it can be used for urban development. The one county rezoning we would support is open space or recreation area, since with floodplain awareness that is easily reparable, recreation uses can coexist with floods. So if you've got fields out there and there's flooding, the kids aren't out there. So that would be something we would support. So
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to bring it back to city council. Anything more from staff?
No, I think if that's all the questions and comments you have, we didn't necessarily take them in order of any particular category, but if you want to give me particular comments with regard to categories, that would be great. Or if there's anything more from the public for specific sections of the city, that would be
I see.
fantastic.
Did you want to say something? Sorry, I'm sorry. I took you. I thought it was. I'm sorry.
AJ?
Oh, man,
Yeah, and then.
I much appreciate it. I don't know, I come from a kind of a really different perspective. I feel like we're lemmings running off a cliff. My family was in Santa Barbara for 100 years. We left just because of this smart growth, grow. This just seems like an excuse to open the door. In terms of land for future, the housing element, I know 20 acres of industrial out there. The people would like to rezone for residential. So there's not going to be a problem with building in our city limits. So I'm going to just throw out one big idea, since everybody's so smart about growth. I got run out of the diamond lane 5 times between Carpinteria and Ventura trying to do the speed limit. It seems like we try to do one thing and then it just gets worse and worse. The population of California has only grown about 2 million in the last 6 years, and it's declining. what's all this growth pressure? There's tons of state out there. Why are we wrecking our last great areas? Living here is a privilege. It's a privilege. We've always felt that way. We just spent 7 months bidding to get back into the cherished area on a mobile home. And it put $200,000 of our last dollars in it. So I don't understand this. I'm gonna throw out a big idea, some really smart idea. What if you start a new town out on San Julian? The San Julian Ranch. Quit crowding us together like we're a rat race. Because we've got road rage incidents out here on 246. Be happy to talk to you about them, but I'm not gonna talk to you about them in public. This whole business of our freeways and living out there, look at people's faces. Everybody's stressed out. You don't say hello to people when you're on a hike now. People are afraid to. So I don't buy any of this. I think we're lemmings jumping off a cliff, buying into the old siren song of more is better, and it isn't. Highway 246, that intersection, I don't even know how you're gonna get past that to increase the population. What's it, 10,000? Right now, it's almost untenable. So thank you for listening.
All
I
right,
say start a city out at St. Julian.
right. Okay. Sorry about that. Let us bring that back to the council for further discussion. And I think to address that, AJ, here's part of the problem. The state is really taking a lot of the reins away from local government. They're coming up with the rules and regulations to try to put housing in areas that one may not belong there, may not fit there, may not come in with the zoning, but they're forcing the cities to really do this. Now, to Scott's point, what'll happen if we don't really kind of put the brakes on a little bit on our boundaries, then they may come in and say, okay, your next arena cycle, you have to have X amount of houses. Wait a minute, we only have this one lot left. Okay, now you have to put a 15-story apartment building there because that will meet your arena numbers. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, right? They can come in and tell you just about, it seems like, and talking to these people, they're doing whatever they want. They're completely discounting local control and telling us this is what you have to do to meet these numbers. And so my asking him the question about, will this kind of pump the brakes a little bit on people trying to put developments outside our urban growth boundary? That's another hurdle that anybody else is going to have to go through when you establish an urban growth boundary. I was initially against this back in 2008 when I first got on council because I felt that we should have had a sphere of influence because some of these things that have developed around us were like a lot of us here in town said, how did that happen? Well, that was because we did not have that seat at the table. So now we're losing our seat at the table with the state. And they're dictating to us saying, you got to put this here whether you want to or not. And so our hands are tied. So to Scott's point earlier here, and my question to him is that if we can say the voters have said we don't want our development to go past this point, then it's going to be more difficult for anybody to develop there. You see what I'm saying? It's not like we're saying, yeah, we want development. You know, a lot of this development is coming from mandates from the state of California, and our hands are tied to do anything. I mean, it's been explained to me that if we deny these projects, they're going to come down on us like a ton of bricks because what we're doing is we're defying them. And so now they're going to say, okay, that's fine. But now we're going to make you develop this piece of property here because you defied us on this other piece of property. It seems like at one point in history, and I've been here since 1958, at one point in history, local control was like paramount above everything else. And the state just kind of kept their nose out of it. But in the past few years, at least the last 15 years that I've been sitting up here on this dais, is that the state has more and more demanded that cities comply with their ideas rather than let us have our own control. So that's where we are. Scott, you had something to add to that?
No, I think you summed it up nicely. That's that is the situation that we live within and we work within every day. And it is it's well and good to say build it over there, but the state doesn't care if we say build it over there. They want it built here, and they require us to do that. So,
and so back to your point, I don't want to see 10, 12, 15-story buildings in Buellton. if we don't do something to maybe kind of curtail that a little bit, that may be what's happening here. Okay,
Just 1 second. I know of a party who's got 20 acres of industrial, and you guys could rezone it to residential. And haven't we?
not if we have an urban growth boundary.
No, it's in the city limit.
Oh, it is.
Yes.
Okay,
It is.
that's an offline question.
We do have properties in the city that are vacant, that are zoned commercial and industrial. And that's a policy call for the city council, whether or not to rezone those properties. But I will always remind the council that it is just as important as it is to have places for people to live within a city. It's important for people to have a place to work within the city
Right.
and for people to be able to shop within the city.
Right.
And those commercial and industrial uses, if we eat them up for residential uses, will not provide the ongoing tax revenues that the city needs to sustain itself in the future.
Yes, and if I can just quickly address that, that's what the housing element plan is. We look at the zoning and we say, okay, this is gonna be the overlay for this, that, and whatever, and we can change this or whatever else. So that would be down the line.
Right. Okay, this doesn't take any an action.
I have a
This
question, though.
Just direct.
I'm
them to-
sorry. I
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question. It is in response to the what was brought by We Watch with that, just of the south piece. If that was annexed or brought in under the urban growth boundary, would that be able to be zoned by the city into open space recreation?
It would, if the city council wanted to extend the urban growth boundary initially to include that area, we could do that, if it were annexed. Now, there was also a request by one of our members of the public that the city should consider annexing property to the city for the sole purpose of creating open space. That's a problem.
Mhm.
Private property owners own that property. If you annex it into the city for the purpose of precluding any development on it at all, you're essentially taking away their property rights. So where we can accomplish things like that is if you extend the city boundaries and annex properties in and allow them to develop portions of it, but maintain the outer areas or undesirable for development areas as open space, you can create that. But I think if you were to annex the property to the south that's identified on our maps and simply take it and attempt to annex it and rezone it as agricultural or open space, you'd have a legal battle with the property owners who are going to be looking for something more lucrative than that. So,
Okay, thank you.
mhm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but again, that could be open to development come our housing element plan. Right?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is not unheard of for the state to look at cities that say, we don't have any available land and say, hey, you've got open space land out there, build on it, or you've got parkland, build on it. It's not out of the question.
Just
So to get to your point, we cannot, like what Scott just says, we can't incorporate this until the landowner, now you have to build parks here. Well, where's the profit in that? You know, we bought 24 acres. I mean, we have plans for that property. But we're not real estate agents. We can't just keep buying up people's properties and turning them into parks. So, you know, if it does get incorporated in here, we would have oversight of that.
Well, let me say this, from where I'm sitting, the best way to ensure that that property doesn't get developed is with the proposal we put on it right now. Because if the county doesn't have an economic incentive to approve a development on that piece of property, because if they do it, the city's going to take that economic incentive away from them.
Right.
Then there's no reason for them to approve anything there. So this actually moves in the direction that that We Watch has been talking about. I think it might seem a little counterintuitive because everyone associates the threat of expanding city boundaries with something negative occurring with environmental degradation, et cetera. But this is a tool that I'm suggesting that would work in favor of maintaining that as agricultural or open space use, whatever the county currently has it zoned as. So.
All right, so I'm gonna make one more comment and then we're gonna move on. What is this, or I guess it is a question. So what is this gonna do to finalize this, to move this forward? You need you need to get this onto the ballot. So maybe you want to address this?
Sure, I'll help. Tonight, just concurrence to bring back to the city council resolutions to put this on the ballot. If we can have concurrence, we can have that direction, then as Scott said, second meeting of next month, those resolutions will be in front of you. You would then adopt the resolutions. One would consolidate your election on that item with the counties, which is fine. It's kind of a pro forma resolution. One would include what the urban growth boundary issue would be, what the title of it would be on the ballot. And then we would lead you through the process of how the council would take charge of drafting the ballot argument in favor. You would authorize my office to draft an impartial analysis. There would be a process to receive the arguments against and how you would, if more than one were submitted, how it would be chosen, which argument against would actually appear on the ballot. We will lead you through all of that, all of those formal and sometimes formalistic legal steps, beginning the second meeting of next month, if you do give Scott direction to go forward with that.
Okay.
I would also ask, in addition to direction to move forward, for some direction or consensus as to what this boundary should look like. If the concept that I put in front of you this evening looks good, then that is sufficient. Simply say, run with this. If you'd like to see other changes or other considerations included in that, let me know what you think those ought to be, and we'll bring back exhibits with that, reflecting that to the council at the next meeting, or on the 23rd, pardon me, of May.
My birthday. Hey, thanks.
75?
Yeah, thanks. John, you have any input on that?
I not wanted input, but I'd like to see the blue, the west and the blue, because I'm afraid somebody's gonna just drop something in there on us. But I don't know. That's something to be considered.
So in your verbiage
But
on this, sorry, John, on your verbiage on this, on that blue area that he's relating to, that will be immediately, if the county says we're gonna build something here, we have total control of that to say we are incorporating this into.
We don't
the
have
city
total
limits.
control. What we have, the initiative would read, the way I'm envisioning is the initiative would indicate that this area is not within the city's urban growth boundary. However, in the event that an urbanized use is approved within this area by the county in the future, as soon as that approval takes place, the city's urban growth boundary automatically extends to encompass that area.
That's the question.
And at that point, it doesn't guarantee that there's going to be an annexation. But if they're proposing an urbanized use, they're going to have to, in all likelihood, tie into municipal services here, which gives us a good argument for requiring an annexation from the county.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's by no means a guarantee, but it is certainly basically putting everyone on notice. Hey, if this is the direction you want to go, expect that we're going to take action to try and annex it.
Or refuse it.
Well, we won't be able to refuse it. If the county has approved it, it will already have been approved. Now, we can oppose a project that is put in this area, but the city council doesn't have the authority to deny it. The county board of supervisors or planning commission would have that. But if something were approved and the urban growth boundary extended and ultimately annexed, then we would have more
Just
control.
using the same concept as the south. So something that we don't want to happen.
So yeah, so I think for you,
Yes.
city manager, and for the rest of the council, what Councilmember
Yes.
Sanchez is saying is his preference would be to have that same sort of legal setup that the city manager is proposing for the south area, have that apply to the west area as well. So instead of including it as part of the urban growth boundary, have it in that same status where if the county were to approve, say, housing in the large 10-acre vacant space immediately to the west of where housing north of 246 is, if the county approves it, then the urban growth boundary would immediately jump out to cover it. And then the city could attempt to annex it and attempt to then reap the benefits of having it, since you're already going to be putting up with the impacts of it. is that what you're saying,
Yeah,
sir?
they
You
wouldn't-
want
they
that
wouldn't come
same
to us
thing
for
added?
anything, But if they went to them for something.
Then,
know.
yeah. And if the four of you are, or if the other three of you are on board with Councilman Sanchez, I know that's something the city manager could work in.
Oh, yeah. It'll just change the color on the shape here and write it into the.
Yeah.
I would almost agree with John. Matter of fact, I do agree with John on that because you drive by there and if I was a developer, I'd go, oh, look at that piece of property. So if maybe we did the same thing with that initial section that you had put in there,
Well,
to
so,
have this same verbiage that, you know, if you guys are gonna come in here and try to put some houses or whatever, you know, we're gonna have some say in it.
We'll have to establish what urban uses are, but essentially if they wanted to put a couple of houses in there, it wouldn't be a big deal. But if they wanted to subdivide smaller than, let's say, half an acre,
Right,
now we're talking about
right.
something that's more
Impact our
urban, yeah.
infrastructure.
so that was, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Good, okay. So I was gonna mention that, right? I don't know what the definition of urban uses are
Mhm.
in areas and also approved, right? So what stage are we with the annexation or proposed annexation sort of come into play? I'm against doing the same for the west because as Mr. Wolf indicated, there are already, as I understand, some county protections against developing that land. And even if that land was like proposed to be developed, there's, and you know, if it's outside the urban growth boundary, there's no protection that would say that that LAFCO can't say, you're gonna take that. It's gonna be part of your city. The housing development's too big for it to run its own septic, right? LAFCO could just say, it's gonna be yours. So I just don't, and the reason the blue extended south, to my understanding, is that there was already a proposed project there that may still be going forward that we're just hoping we can sort of reap some of that benefit of it. And no such project has been proposed to the west, and I don't want to sort of incentivize any of that.
You don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know.
It could be well, and when we heard about the south boundary, somebody came up and said, by the way, and they had the whole thing lined up. Somebody could have that thing all subdivided right now,
Yeah,
and we don't know about it.
yeah,
We don't know that.
that's
It's a
true.
nice thought.
That's true, but also, I mean,
Without
if we
any
do,
protection to it.
if we do go west, there's no stopping where we would stop doing this, right? I mean, we do that a little bit. Why that 10-acre parcel? Why not the next one? I mean, maybe there's other things that come into
Well,
play. when you go
I
west.
believe once we get past the area that's highlighted here, the half mile to the west, I think somewhere fairly close to that is where the Santa Rita Hills area plan comes into play, which again adds another layer of protection within the county to preclude that sort of development. I mean, it's identified from that point out as being predominantly agricultural. I don't know where that line lies. I can find that out. If that's of interest to the council, I can find that out and have that available for you at the meeting on the 23rd, and then you can decide where you actually want to draw that line for a similar blue area on the west, if that's the direction you want to go. Whatever your direction.
That's a good idea. Or if we don't, just kick it down the road to that.
All right, so I'll plan for something along the same line to the south to be had on the west. I'll just determine where the appropriate line and appropriate line might be, and you can determine that.
I think we have to be mindful too, like this urban growth boundary was founded for a reason, and I do think that we have to make sure that the people feel like their opinions being respected. And I do feel concerned with Councilmember Hornick, the same thing of just by extending to the west, even if it's an invitation of that blue concept, that it starts to make it seem like there's an intention of expansion versus a prevention of. And so I think we have to be mindful with that. So I agree having that discussion at that point, but I do think we need to be coming with an editing eye versus an expansive one.
Okay.
Got it?
If that's all the direction you've got, then I have it.
Are we gonna talk about with that direction, the definition of urban and approved?
I will bring back
Okay.
some proposed definitions for urban
Right.
uses to put in the initiative. Yes.
We will have some more information at that time.
Yes.
Okay,